politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us today. We're going to once again focus on one very important movie that we want you to see. You want to mark your calendars for Thursday, September 14th. You know exactly why these are so important. These one-day events are just absolutely crucial for you to bring out people in your sphere of influence. It could be your Sunday school class, could be your church, people in your family. And we're going to be talking about this new movie coming out, The Heart of Man. We have a link to heartofmanmovie.com, and we'll talk more about that as we go through the program today. If you'd like to join us a little bit later, we'll open up the phones, but let me first of all go around the round table, and we also have guests not only in studio but by phone. Noel Bouché is certainly well known to our listeners, the CEO of pureHope, organization that has been providing these resources about for parents, and also really addressing this sexualized culture in some very significant ways. Father of two daughters, so he certainly understands this issue as well. A graduate of South Dakota State University, where he was a quarterback, and also graduating with honors from the University of Texas School of Law. Noel, always great to have you in studio.
Wonderful to be back. Thanks for the invite. Thanks especially for the ministry we're going to do together, talking about this film that we believe God is going to use mightily.
Outstanding film. We've been talking about it for a while, so some of our listeners, if they remember the last couple of times we've had you or Jasper or Jason, who we'll talk about in just a minute, in studio, will know what we're talking about. But let me go to Jasper Hall. He is the president of pureHope. He has 3 teenagers, so pray for him every day, of course. Lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, an individual that focuses on operation, program strategy, and all that it entails there at pureHope. And Jason Jasper, great to have you in studio with us today.
Great to be here, Kerby. Thanks so much. I'm honored to be a part of this team and really excited about the film and all that God's doing.
Let me mention another J there. I just slipped accidentally. Jason Pamer's been with us before. Co-wrote and produced all sorts of things, including Rape for Profit, Save for a Reason. And Jason, thank you for joining us by phone.
Thanks for having me back.
And then Bryan Bird is a 30-year veteran of the Hollywood film industry. Matter of fact, you're very familiar with one of the films which we promoted quite a bit this year, and that is The Case for Christ, as well as some of the others, Captive, Ultimate Life, Not Easily Broken. And Bryan, thank you for joining us as well.
Glad to be with you guys today, Kerby. It's a real honor, and very excited to be able to share this film with you, with your listeners.
Let me encourage everybody to go to the website. We have a trailer and some other things, but Noel, give us a little bit of the history, because we've been talking about this for about 2 years, it seems like. So remind those of us that don't have all the perfect memory how this came about and why we need to all show up on September 14th.
Yeah, it has been a journey, and that's how I think about this film. It's twofold. It's a journey and it's a community, because there's already a community around it. There's a core group, and then there's literally thousands of people who have helped make it happen. It's a donation-based project on the front end to produce a $1.2 million film that is lights out brilliant in terms of its artistic excellence. People will be blown away on September 14th when they see this in a theater. But very quickly, and Jason will talk at length about this, and Bryan as well, as a Hollywood veteran, about the artistic excellence and the message of it. But it's a docudrama that incredibly powerfully weaves together real stories of sexual brokenness, and redemption through a reimagined telling of the prodigal son parable, shot on location in Hawaii with drones and amazing CGI to really bring to life what shame is, what our brokenness is, but more importantly, of course, who God has made us and how he is inviting us back into fellowship with him, no matter our past, no matter the way that brokenness has manifested in our lives. So it's a film that is unique. I'll let Jason talk about it. The MPA didn't even know how to categorize it at first, because it's so unique in the way that it brings these realities of God's love, of the Father's heart, of our Redeemer's restless pursuit of us even in the cave of our own shame and brokenness, and brings us back to a table of community. So it brings me back to the fact that this was a journey and a community. And you're right, it's been a 4.5-year, 5-year project. Independent films are interesting things to begin with, but this one particularly unique because really started with our kind of visionary, Tony Anderson, whose story is in the film, who scored the film, a brilliant composer, but really said, man, this world is filled with injustice. There's a global sex trade that is eating people up, chewing them up, spitting them out. What's driving that? Well, it's driving into sexual brokenness and porn addiction. So how do we get to the root of that and connect it? But when this team started to gel and come together, and Jason stepped in, we really realized that we need to not just expose the problem, but lead people to the answer. What is the answer from the shame that's driving people into compulsive behavior that's feeding that beast? And Jason Pamer obviously has a background in that because he and Eric Esau, our director, had just finished Rape for Profit, which he can tell us about. But that we really looked at it and said, that's been done. What has not been done? And the Heart of Man film has not been done until now. It's never been done. Nothing has been as creatively put together as this is. And I'm just proud to be part of the team, like Jasper said.
Yeah. Jason Pamer, let me come to you for just a minute because we had you in studio about a year ago, and this is when we were talking about this as a great opportunity to bring people together. But add to what Noel's already shared in terms of why we should be at that film and how you put in some of the production values that people will be able to see that night.
Yeah, I mean, Noel did a good job. It should be just him on this radio interview. I don't know why all of us are on here. I'm kidding. It was so good, though. Yeah, I mean, it's taken a team, in large part represented by the guys on this call and a few others outside of this call that have spent much time, much resource to pour in. I mean, you've got Bryan Bird, who's, at the peak, sort of the pinnacle of career in terms of creating powerful stories seen by millions and millions of people. And this guy's on calls almost every day with me, helping steward the project with my producing partner, Jens, and I. And so, anyways, there's a lot of just value and excellence around the film. And I think ultimately we landed on a story that's universal. It is not about any particular behavior. It's about the insidious lie that shame gives, which is that you're alone. You're the only one struggling with this. The Father's face is not toward you in this moment. You got to get out of that moment, and then maybe he'll look upon you. Maybe. But he's going to have to do it through Jesus, because if Jesus isn't between the two of you, you're in trouble. God the Father wants nothing to do with you. And I think this is something that we all wrestle with to some degree, and we all have recognized, or we all can recognize, that voice of shame. And so we just try to contrast that with the voice of the Father. And we do it through this parabolic retelling of the prodigal son, the deconstructed look at that. And then just really powerful people sharing vulnerably their vice, their brokenness. And again, contrasting that with where they recognized and where they heard the voice of the Father, they've come to realize his face is toward them in the moment of giving in to whatever the behavior is. We've had some people say, you can remove the documentary particular stories of sexual brokenness and replace it with anything. And this narrative kind of bedrock framework can hold within it any story of us walking away and then ultimately being rescued and brought back.
Well said. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will continue our conversation today. Just so privileged to have two guests in studio, two by phone. Let me again encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net, because what we have there is we have a link to the Twitter feed as well as the Facebook page. Of course, the website itself, heartofmanmovie.com. This is taking place Thursday, September 14th. We really encourage you to do a couple of things. Number one, mark that on your calendar. Then, number two, figure out how to promote it to others. We have a trailer there. It's about 3 minutes long. Watch the trailer, then click the share button. Send it to somebody. Send it to your pastor. Send it to a leader in the church. Maybe you're a leader in the church. Send it to some others, or put it on your Facebook page. Get some publicity out, and we'll come back and talk about what will be taking place Thursday, September 14th on The Heart of Man right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
If the younger generation wants to know the keys to success, they need to follow the success sequence published by Bradford Wilcox and Wendy Wang. They say that the millennial generation is more likely to flourish financially if they follow the success sequence. They say you need to get at least a high school degree, work full-time, and marry before having any children, in that order. Their recent study at the American Enterprise Institute has the title, The Millennial Success Sequence, Marriage, Kids, and the Success Sequence Among Young Adults. They persuasively argue that if millennials follow this success sequence, they will have a 97% chance of not being poor by the time they reach their young adult years. In fact, 86% of those studied had family incomes in the middle class or above. Their study reminded me of another study posted by William Galston. Many years ago, he found that in order to avoid being poor, you must do three things. First, graduate from high school. Second, wait until age 20 to have children. And three, wait until getting married to have children. He has found that young people who follow these rules have a 92% chance of staying above the poverty line. By contrast, a young person who breaks just one of these rules has a 79% chance of being below the poverty line. In a more recent op-ed, William Galston, who served in the Clinton administration, made it even simpler. Want to know the best poverty cure? Get married. Single parenthood hurts all children, and black children bear the greatest brunt of the harm. All of these different studies come to the same conclusion. Marriage is important, and the keys to success are to follow what is now being called the success sequence. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett, now playing rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you would like to join us a little bit later, we'll open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. But if you just joined us, we're talking about this new movie coming out, The Heart of Man. Thursday, September 14th. Your first assignment, mark that on your calendar. Number two, of course, we drive you to heartofmanmovie.com, or simply you go to pointofview.net. You'll learn a little bit more about some of our guests in studio, Noel Bouché, Jasper Hall, as well as Jason Pamer. We just talked to him a minute ago. But Bryan Bird, let me talk to you. Individual that many of us know because of so many films that you've done, The Case for Christ, or Captive, or Ultimate Life, or maybe the TV series, for example, Touched by an Angel, and, of course, many others that you've been involved with. You've been involved with these kinds of films for 30 years, but you've been quoted as saying that The Heart of Man is one of the most important projects I've worked on in 3 decades and one of the most meaningful of my career. Tell us more.
Well, yes, thank you. Look, you know, this is not just about entertainment, this movie, although I do believe people will enjoy the beauty and the wonder of our, as Noel said, the recreation of the prodigal son story in this movie, the parable. But, you know, sometimes it's important to share universal truths with people. And the universal truth is that God loves us so much that he's prepared a way back for us from our shame. And I have approached this whole project as an incredible labor of love. I love this film because I believe it is for lack of a better term, it cracks the enigma code on shame. We absolutely crack the accuser, the enemy's code, his weapon of shame that he uses against all of us. And this is not, you know, I hear some people saying, well, boy, do I really want to go out to a theater to deal with something so heavy.
Yes.
This is not a heavy film. It's beautifully full of grace and compassion because it absolutely portrays God's way home for us, the path that he's preparing back from shame. Shame is not a barrier to God's love. It's actually our bridge back because he has made the bridge for us. And I just think that the tsunami of cultural change, of moral shift in our society, really our world, for all that counts for, has already hit. The tsunami is here. We're all up to our necks in water, just like we're seeing in poor Houston these days. And we are all up to our necks in water because the tsunami has already arrived. It's not out on the horizon threatening us. It's already here. Every family, probably every person, has an issue to deal with in this regard, whether it be their own brokenness, whether they have an addiction of some sort, or they have a family member that is addicted. And I can't imagine a more important movie in terms of kingdom value, in terms of our future and our life and our flourishing as people of God, than The Heart of Man on September 14th. And it's actually, I'm making a ruling right today. Nobody should miss this movie. Nobody should miss it.
That's incredible. High praise from Bryan Bird. Let me, if I can, for just a minute, come to Jasper Hall. You're the president, of course, of pureHope. And we've talked about this issue of shame. That's an important concept that I think the first time I ever heard somebody talk about that was probably Dan Allender. And I believe he's in the film, isn't he?
That is right. He is in the film. And this is an extremely important issue. For me, I had an opportunity to screen the film early on at an event that was put on by Josh McDowell and Ron DeHaas of Covenant Eyes. And really just to affirm kind of what Bryan's saying around this whole issue of shame and what's happening in the culture and the world. I think what the film does uniquely is it really goes to the emotion no matter where you are on the spectrum. And at that event that we did with Josh and those folks there, I noticed there was about 600 to 800 pastors, lay leaders, counselors, etc. After a screening, the emotion in the room was very high, but it was silent because everyone, you could tell, was in that reflective state of, wow, what just happened? And now I'm faced with how do I address that guilt and shame, or how do I celebrate the God's redemption and reconciliation?
Noel, give us an overview of what will happen in the film and how we can get involved.
Yeah, well, again, it is a journey. The film itself has been a journey, which you've helped us track and tell people about, and that's why we're so excited about it landing September 14th. It's the date we give it to the world, even though, it's been a journey where we've screened it for literally hundreds, if not a couple thousand leaders already who are now out there as champions for this film. But September 14th, we give it, and then we go from there in terms of DVD on demand that Jason can speak about. But we hope everyone will access it. But the film itself is a journey. We follow the prodigal son. And now with what we know about the journey of brokenness and addiction and neurologically how that happens, how spiritually that plays in, we track the prodigal son from the parable of how he goes through every step of that journey to both the pigsty back to the Father's table. So we go through walking off the cliff, as Jason mentioned. There's a cliff dive in the film, 60 feet up, which is that step off to that temptation and finally taking the plunge and being washed ashore and being caught in the lagoon of temptation, stuck again and again, finally being dragged into the cave of our own despair of that shame, which ultimately is something we all wrestle with, as everyone said. Shame is that inner judgment that I am inherently unlovable. And if someone knew the details that I keep hidden in my secret life, they couldn't bear to be in relationship with me. And that's what this film, the Dan Allender's, the Jackie Hill Perry's, the Trailer Melody Lavorne's, the voices that we hear in the film walk us through of how that is not true. It's a lie from our adversary, and it's a voice that's been crafted in our own heart. And that's what it saves it from. One line that jumps out at me in this film that will resonate with everyone, I think, because we all have a journey of brokenness and sexual brokenness, because our sexual identity is ultimately that male or female image bearing that we do every single day. And many of us have seen how that sexual identity has been marred by sexual activity or behavior in this fallen world. But there's a line at the end that says, I finally come to the place where I realize this Jesus, this Savior, this Redeemer who leads me to the Father, he came not just to save me from my sin, but to rescue me from my shame. And that is a journey. That is a gap that many of us as believers have not closed yet. We've not walked. We've not found that brokenness is actually a bridge to the Father, not a barrier. And so I just can't wait. This whole team can't wait to get that message to the world, because we've already seen it transform lives. And if you're listening right now, again, September 14th in theaters, we're going to see revival unleashed.
Jason, let me come to you for just a minute, because he mentioned, again, some other opportunities, because I know as people see this film, they're going to be sitting in the theater. And, of course, they're going to have that reaction that Jasper just talked about. But then about 5 seconds later, they're going to go, I want to get a copy of this because I want to show this in my church. I want to show this in my small group. So that's the second step, which we might mention right now, that people can take after they show up on September 14th, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that this collective team has been working on pretty tirelessly over the last year is a 130-page guide. It's a beautiful guide. It carries the same aesthetic and design flow that the film does, and it kind of illuminates the deeper strata of the film. There's a lot of filmmaker insights in there into things that people might not get on their first watch or second watch. Gets into the theology behind the film. We have like a really just fantastic world-class group of contributors that have all written for this and contributed excerpts from previous materials they've sent out. So it's a really beautiful thing. That'll be available just a few weeks after the film. There's actually going to be a in-theater only promo on that guide that will be there available to people at the Fathom release on the 14th. And then we'll do the traditional windows. We're trying to condense it as much as possible so that that DVD and that iTunes and Amazon and Netflix, all those access points can come as quickly as possible. We don't have any official release dates on those yet, but just know that we're working our best to condense them into the fall, as many of them as we can. But the film will be available in many, many different mediums, along with this guide that is for kind of individual introspection and work, and then it works really well in group settings as well. So we already have churches across the country committing to walk this through all their life groups, their small groups, their core groups, the curriculum. Yeah.
Let me take a break, and then when we come back, we will continue our conversation today. Let me just mention this as a good time for you to go to that website. Go to our website or go directly to heartofmanmovie.com. There is a place for you to get your tickets. I already typed in my zip code to see how many different theaters around me, and I came up with a dozen theaters not far from where I am right now that will be showing this. And then there's a place for group discounts, and when we come back, I want to talk about that. You've heard me say before that our Sunday school class, which is a pretty large one, meets in the chapel at Prestonwood. We actually sometimes we just rent out a theater. We just take the whole theater and then just buy all the tickets and then distribute to everybody. And sometimes if we don't get enough people, we sell them back. But this is a great way to bring your church, your whole small group, people in your family. We'll talk more about how to do that. But first of all, mark September 14th. We'll come back with more right after this.
From Affirm Films and Provident Films, who brought you War Room, comes All Saints. New pastor Michael Spurlock, his struggling congregation, and a group of refugees come together, trusting God as they plant seeds for a future that might just save them all.
Start a farm, we work together, we save the church.
All Saints, starring John Corbett. Now playing. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at allsaintsmovie.com.
Point of View Radio wants to fuel change in our culture, but we need your help to do it. And I use the word need very intentionally. I worked with a well-known radio ministry for 29 years, a program that helped a lot of people. They got saved, they got elected to Congress. It produced a lot of good. But people started thinking that someone else would give, and that program isn't here anymore. Your gift today can make sure that doesn't happen to Point of View. Visit pointofview.net and click the banner Change Happens With You, or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today as we talk about this new film coming out September 14th, and we encourage you to go to the studios and have a chance in these theaters there to watch it and to really understand a little bit more about how you can use this to influence not only your life but the life of other individuals that are in your sphere of influence. Noel Bouché, Jasper Hall in studio with us, and by phone Jason Pamer as well as Bryan Bird. And Bryan, let me come to you for just a minute. You've been involved in all sorts of major television and movie projects, but again, you felt that this was one of the most important. And Jason shared just a little bit about this, and it seems to me this is a little different than your typical film. There's an opportunity for people to be impacted. There's an opportunity for there to be an ongoing influence because of some of those resources, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. And I just want to echo what Noel and Jasper are saying there, that the big elephant in every sanctuary on Sundays is this issue of sexual brokenness. And it's actually shame can come from all kinds of brokenness, right? It's not just sexual brokenness. It could be opioid addiction or painkillers or alcoholism or, all the reasons why we have recovery ministries in our churches. And yet, often it's an uncomfortable topic for pastors to deal with because it's there, it's sitting in the room, kind of lurking there, and it's in every pew, right, on every Sunday. And what's beautiful about the Heart of Man is that it is God's message back to us saying, it's okay, I'm here, I'm there with you. I'm in the room with you when you fall for the lies of the enemy. I'm in the room with you when you are accused and when you've locked yourself in this cave of shame that you're living in with all kinds of other people just like you. And that's what I think is so powerful about not only the September 14th date, but that September 14th is just the beginning of what I believe God is going to use as a movement to destroy the enemy's weapon of shame on all of us. We all have experienced it. It's the one thing that we have universal in our lives because it's his best weapon against us. And we need to just crack the code and get rid of him and out him. We're outing the enemy with this movie. We're totally outing him.
Very good.
And undercutting his weaponry of choice against us. And that's what I love so much about this. I think it's going to bring revival, as Noel said. It's going to give us a new sense of refreshment with our own faith in Christ and our own acceptance of the gift of grace and compassion and sacrifice that was made for us. The most important message in the universe that anybody can share with one another is that message. And this movie is the key to receiving it once more, to understanding it, to understanding that God is in the room with us right now.
That's so good. I'm going to jump in and Kerby, Bryan, for me, because we've been working together, I've heard him say this, 1,000 times, and it's finally starting to sink in with me that this is not just a movie. It's a movement. As Bryan said. And the reason it's a movement is because it's a message, and it's a message that's not there, and it's a message that has not been there, and it's a message that ultimately points us to the Messiah in a new way, because that's where the film starts. The film starts with a place everyone can relate to, which is I have broken relationships in my life. And many of us, as the film starts, says, I had a broken relationship with my father. I had a broken relationship with my parents. I had a broken relationship from very early where trust was broken, where abandonment occurred, where abuse came into my life. And that is what this is about, is restoring relationship with the one that, again, when shame has control of our lives, we cannot believe that he wants to be in relationship. We might believe he came to save us from our sin, but we don't believe he came to bring us to a table to feast. And that's what this film helps us get to see in a new way. That's why I brag on these filmmakers, Jason and Eric and Jens, all the time, because they have done something amazing. And it is going to be a movement. I can't wait to see what happens.
Jason, let me come to you for just a minute, because I've heard stories that even on the set, even among the people doing the film, this has had an impact. Is that true?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we committed to early on in the process was that people would be more important than even process or the budget, the timeline that we were going to try to make an emphasis on. We're going to talk about these things of the heart and being known at my worst and yet loved the most, and we have to reflect that. And so, there was a luau thrown for our entire crew, and one of my first AD is a industry vet like Bryan. He was on Starship Troopers and a number of major films and TV shows. He AD God's Not Dead and Two and all those, Joth Riggs, and he came up to me and was like, I've never ever been on a crew where the crew was celebrated before day one. And I think that was a goal, and it was an emphasis there. So I think that's one of the ways. We had some guys even on the crew that were involved in shooting scenes in Hollywood that we would not advocate for, but they were not believers, and that they were on set with us, having meals with us every night, listening to all the scenes and production and being exposed to it. And there's just really cool relationships that have been birthed and born from that. And then, we've done little releases over the last 2.5 years online to some of our givers, and then in person at like the McDowell and Covenant Eyes conference last year. And we've been inundated with tens of thousands of responses from all around the world of people that are like, I'm thirsty for this. My culture, my city, my country is not talking about the deep things of the heart, and more importantly, the heart of the Father for us in these moments of giving in to addiction and vices. So we know that there's a need and demand for it. And the post-processing we're doing right now, it's beautiful and it's rich and fun. We actually taped a 30-minute version of this that will play at the end of the film in theaters. And again, it's exclusive to a Fathom experience, at least in theaters. And so that'll be tacked onto the end of the film for people to sit before they walk out of that theater and go to that car, and before they start thinking about what they need to confess or how they need to walk forward. There's a way for them to hear and listen to some of these things that we're talking about on your show today.
Jasper, let me come to you, because, of course, you spoke to the pastors, and this 30-minute ending segment, if you will, is an opportunity really for pastors and leaders to say, okay, here's immediately how we can begin to apply this. Because I think there's some listening right now that are saying, okay, I'm not exactly sure what the film is, and I'm not sure what to do with it when it's over. You, in a sense, have already provided that opportunity, haven't you?
Absolutely. Not only in this resource, but, the narrative to date has really been about, what's that action when you walk away? It's not the rah-rah, oh, that was a great film, I felt great when I walked away. What's interesting is, I think not only can you have that resource in hand, but Bryan touched on this earlier, because it's on every pew every Sunday. There are literally churches that we interact with throughout the country that say, hey, it's not a big issue. We really can't talk about that here. And as a matter of fact, I was in Africa a few weeks ago, really looking at introducing the Pure Hope ministry and many of the tools and resources like the film, et cetera. And they were saying, we're hungry for this. We know this is an issue. So here we are in West Africa talking about these same issues of guilt and shame and sin and so on and so forth in the context of church and Christians. And so we believe this resource is actually going to be transcendent beyond you walk away with this from the film, but you also have this opportunity to continue to minister, and, like attracts like. So you're going to keep finding those other leaders, those other people that can proliferate this message. And I just have to say, really, on the end of that, even after Jason's commentary there, I still today can't watch the trailer without crying.
Yes.
And that's not saying a lot, as Noel can probably tell you, because I cry a lot.
This man can't wake up in the morning without crying. But, God's mercies are new every morning.
Exactly. But see, what that says to me is that there's something happening in the anointing in the spirit realm that says this is going to move people beyond what they can expect or think.
Mm-hmm. We need to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into a little bit more of that. If you'd like to join us, maybe you have a comment or a question real quickly, 800-351-1212. We'll take more calls in the second hour, but I wanted to, again, encourage you to do a couple of things. First of all, we've already talked about mark your calendar, September 14th. Number two, go to the website, heartofmanmovie.com, or even on our website, pointofview.net. We have the video there. We have the trailer. The trailer's only 3 minutes. Take the time to watch it. Now, at the end, you're going to say, okay, there's a lot of visual images. I'm not sure where all this takes me. And, of course, you've heard a little bit more about this, so then you can go and learn a little bit more. But click on that share button. This is an opportunity for you to send it by email to your pastor, to your youth leader, to some other important individuals in your church. There's a place for you to hit that share button. You can put it on your Facebook page if you have a Facebook page, or to put it as a Twitter tweet and to send it out and get people thinking about this. So that's another great resource. And if you have people finding themselves saying, well, okay, I see the trailer, but I still don't understand, we have also some other links that you can follow. And no, I would think they could go to Pure Hope if they had any real questions about this, couldn't they?
Absolutely. It's the first thing you'll see when you come to purehope.net, along with our other resources.
So, again, that would be just another thing to do. But let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with these individuals around the table. The movie is The Heart of Man. We'll talk more about that. And we'll take a few of your phone calls if you'd like to join us. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It all started with a postal worker, a bunch of pigs, and an old-time radio show. But it ended in court. Back in 1937, Wayman Presley, an Illinois postal worker, decided that it would be a good idea to erect a cross on Bald Knob. The fundraising was slow until Ralph Edwards interviewed Presley on the wildly popular radio show This Is Your Life. Myrta Klutz must have heard the show because she soon conceived the idea to raise and sell pigs to finish the construction. Klutz, with the help of Presley, raised $30,000 worth of pork. So there it stood, 111 feet of gleaming white concrete, 1,034 feet above sea level, near the Bald Knob Wilderness. But it turns out not everyone liked it. Robert Sherman didn't, so Sherman did what most don't think to do when they disagree with an inanimate object. He sued the state of Illinois for giving out a grant to help restore the aging monument. But his lawsuit was dismissed. Turns out Sherman didn't have a dog or pig in the fight. Just because someone is a taxpayer is not enough connection to a case to challenge an action by the state. Sherman versus Illinois raises an important point. Just because someone is offended by something religious does not mean a lawsuit will be successful. State officials should remember that next time someone demands they purge religion from public view. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today as we talk about this film, The Heart of Man, September 14th. And just before we wind down this first hour, Jasper, I wanted to come to you. This is a project which I've known about for 2 years. Now I find out it's been going for 5 years. It has been bathed in prayer, and it still needs to be bathed in prayer, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Thanks, Kerby. The truth there is, I was thinking about this as we were walking through the interview. Shout out to the people that have been on mission with us, on journey, on support, and looking to really promote and push what we're doing here. But the reality is, Noel mentioned this earlier, it is a movement. And with a movement, you need that groundswell, but you also need that undergirding and support. And that's what I would say to the listeners today, is that we need to be undergirded with that prayer, as we know so many people are going to be coming into these theaters, and many will be believers, many will not.
Yes. No, let me come to you for just a minute, because people, again, are starting to think, okay, who do I bring? We have a church, and do I bring my youth group? Do I just say it's open to any families, or is there an age issue? So, since we're talking about sexual brokenness, I guess that's a question that I suspect every pastor and every parent's thinking right now as they're listening to the interview.
Yeah, this is it's a film for an experience for everyone, and talking about the history and the journey, maybe it's interesting to throw this out there that it really started as a film for men, and men dealing with sexual brokenness, pornography addiction, and other manifestations, and originally titled The Hearts of Men. We were going after men. What we realized in this journey, as this movement began, was that it applied to all of us as humans. That it applied equally to men and women, and more than that, not just a sexual addiction or something that was manifesting that way. As Bryan said earlier, this is for all of our forms of brokenness that come out and spill out into our lives, and that we feel shame about, that we live secret lives about. It hits all of those issues because it hits ultimately relationship with the Father, the one who has come down to save us and raise us up and bring us to a table, to a feast, as well as relationship with each other. And that's what life is about. That's what we were formed to have in the garden, was relationship. It's what is being reestablished, and it's also our day-to-day brokenness, because, as Patrick Carnes, who's the godfather of sexual addiction research, has said, sexual addiction is a pathological relationship with that thing that becomes a sexual object or compulsion. It's all about relationships, and that's what this film ultimately gets to, is how do we live authentic relationships even when we have walked through perhaps the depths of despair in our own brokenness. And the stories that you will hear are powerful. They're accessible. They're told by people who have walked through brokenness, who are also storytellers. And that's why people walk out of this in tears with hope, because someone's touched something that they've never touched before. We have counselors the other day who emailed us and said, I've been doing this for 30 years. I was weeping, probably scaring off the customers at this coffee shop that I was watching in with the link to watch the film. We've had people get up at the end and walk out. Unbelievers get out because no one's touched this wound, this father wound, or this alienation that they've had. But those are tears of hope, and we think that's what people will experience, and that's part of this movement, I think.
Jason, let me come to you just again to talk about how people can use this, and questions maybe pastors or parents might have about who to bring to the film.
Yeah, I echo what Noel was talking about. It's for everybody, and it absolutely needs to be experienced male, female. It should not be relegated to a Tuesday morning men's Bible study breakfast, although those things are low-hanging fruit. Our hope is that it's in the main auditorium of these churches in terms of promoting to both men and women, that it's an experience that requires both of the sexes to be present and to talk about, because all this stuff affects both. There's a lot of it's relationally driven, and there's relationship at the crux of this thing. So in terms of age, it's rated PG-13. It does deal with some strong thematic elements, and so the youngest we've seen in a screening is about that 13, 14 age. I would just say, parents, be wise about what your conversations have been like up to this point in terms of sexuality and identity, and your kid better than we do. pureHope is on the bleeding edge of creating resources for parents and their quest materials and stuff like this, and they have shepherded it with parents, and I think they would say the same thing in terms of that age is probably the right age. Most of our youth are already encountering the illicit side of this conversation at the age of 10, 11 years old. And so our encouragement would be, well, as a parent, engage them as well, to have that conversation, to beat that conversation, to get ahead of it and to open it up. So our heart would be parents, male, female, family, small groups. We're seeing a lot of celebrate recovery groups, or the recovery groups specific at different churches, taking their Thursday night and going to the theater together. We've got a 7-day devotional right now that's on the Bible app. It's a YouVersion 7-day devotional, and we've seen unbelievable response to that. Over 6,000 subscriptions in less than a week of people that are starting to access the deep truths of the film before it comes out. There are clips on every day Bible study and scripture references to help sort of anchor these truths in the scripture. And so people are starting to eat this up, and we want people to be able to do that. And we're trying to resource pastors. When the film comes out, and it spurs this conversation and brings it to the surface. How do you steward that well? Because our hope and belief is that in the local church, there is a long tail of ministry opportunity there.
Wow.
So the devotional is one thing. The guide is another thing.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a book that we're going to be working on, a trade book that we're hoping to release around Christmas that kind of just goes to, again, deeper places and gets a different audience in and starting to chew on these truths.
Again, September 14th. Bryan, just before we run out of time, wanted to get your final comments and admonition to some of our listeners to show up on September 14th.
Yes, absolutely. It's absolutely a powerful opportunity for groups of people to go. You know, we're better together. We've always known this, right? In church, that's why small groups exist in most churches. Little churches within bigger churches is how that pattern is best. How discipleship and transformation and sanctification really happens. So we are hoping that big groups of people will go to this movie together because we're better together. And honestly, the reason confession is always good for the soul is because it absolutely breaks the chains of confession and information and working together through these issues because we all have to deal with them in one way or another is absolutely the best way to break the chains that we have put on ourselves because the enemy told us to, right? He handed us the chains and we actually locked ourselves up in this cave of shame. And so the best way to just take the chains off is through information. That's how we break slavery, right, is to take the chains off. And the best way to do it is just to have an honest conversation with people who care about us, who know us better than anybody else. And this movie will do that.
Yes.
The 30-minute roundtable at the end of the movie is a pattern of how this can happen in every local church in the country. Everybody can watch the movie, and then local resources can come to bear, so it's a safe, soft landing for people after they experience the movie. They can plug right into ministry.
Very good. You know, Noel, they say that a typical birth is supposed to be 9 months. This one's been 5 years, but you're glad to have birthed this baby, aren't you?
Well, if perfection comes at 9 months, imagine how wonderful this is going to be. 5 months. We're ready. We're ready. The world's ready. And if this is the first time you're hearing about it, September 14th, come and join this community, join this movement, come out of the shadows, come and do ministry with us.
I might just mention, second hour, we're going to have an open line. I think some of you want to share about your addiction or brokenness. We'll certainly take those calls, and so we'll load those up right now. But I want to thank all of you for coming into the studio today and joining us by phone. And just before we run out of time in this segment, let me again mention that you can go to heartofmanmovie.com. You can type in your zip code. You can find out where this is going to take place in your community. I would encourage you to actually mark your calendar right now for September 14th, and then watch the video that's a trailer and share it with others. And let's see what kind of turnout we get on September 14th. Guys, thanks for being with us in studio today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
We will take a break. We will have an open line in the second hour. That will take place right after these important messages.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. First hour, we spent some time talking about this issue of sexual addiction and sexual brokenness, and encourage you to actually mark your calendar for September 14th for this movie, The Heart of Man. And you can go to our website, heartofmanmovie.com. I'll take some phone calls related to that, and if you'd like to express your opinion about that or maybe share your testimony, we certainly welcome that. A little bit later in the program, though, I do want to get to a few of the articles I've posted today. One by Ben Shapiro, Hurricane Harvey's Men, Women, and Children. In a crisis, strong men are no longer toxic. Women protect children, and children are innocent. And if you begin to recognize that when we have a crisis, all of a sudden it's not so bad for men to be masculine, is it? It doesn't really matter whether you're black, white, Latino, if you're just saving lives out there on the bayou and in the flood. And then also Jonah Goldberg's piece, Harvey reveals the better side of a divided America. So we'll get into some of those issues. Of course, there's going to be an ongoing debate about tax reform. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And so we have some information on that issue as well. And if we have time, if not today, we'll certainly cover it on our Friday weekend edition. One individual is saying that indeed these Christian ideas have no place in America, and even some are suggesting that Marco Rubio, even quoting the Bible on his tweets, is unconstitutional. So we've got a lot to cover, but let's first of all take a call from the previous hour. And if you'd like to address this issue of sexual addiction or sexual brokenness, as we are going to be talking about this issue, I'll give a parental advisory. We will be real careful about what we say, but if you'd like to join us or share your testimony, 1-800-351-1212. We'll head first to the state of Michigan. Keith, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my call.
What would you like to share?
Well, I'd like to share is that, for one thing, I want to say thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. You are a busy man. You're on so many different projects and programs. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, and you're advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
One of the things that I want to say about myself is that what you were saying in the hour previous really touched a chord to my heart, because for me as myself, I got involved with a sexual addiction situation. I was about 7 years old, and that was about over 40 years ago. And granted, pornography was really hard to get and whatnot, but it still was available depending on the group of people you happened to be with, and my parents weren't in the greatest group of people. So I was addicted, and I went through playing a double life, going between as trying to be a Christian. As I grew older, as I turned my heart over to God, but I still struggled between a double life. And I lied. I was listening to myself and talking to myself, and I was believing a lie. The lie was, there's no way that I can control this. There's no way that I can get over this addiction. Just live with it and struggle with it and cry and feel the pain, but there's nothing I can do about it. Well, not too long ago, and I'm talking about just a few months ago, I came to the epiphany that it's my choice. It's my choice to decide if I am going to sin or not. It's my choice to decide if I am going to be addicted to anything, but in this case, to the pornography and the sexual addiction. And where am I going to take that? When the epiphany hit me, it's like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do with this? Am I going to continue to fall down the path and destroy my life, destroy my family's life, my kids? I have children, my wife. Because my wife was saying, just stop, don't do it. It's like, there's no way I can do it. And then I realized she was right. Wives are usually right a lot of times.
Yes.
But I realized she's right. I have a choice. And so I decided not to do it. And I'll tell you what, it took a little bit of time because my body being addicted and the physical addiction and everything goes along with it. But when I finally got over it, there was just a freedom that I have never experienced in all my life, over 50 years worth of my life. And it's only because of the grace of God and the Holy Spirit working with me, God working with me and just saying, you can be free. Just make that choice. And so thank God that he was right there with me.
That is a great story. And, you know, there are some individuals that don't even come from a Christian point of view that have shared about breaking the sexual addiction. I read one, I think it was in the Washington Post, if I remember right, where he said, I just finally realized, okay, if I want to break this addiction, I have to do something else. And he said, I know, fishing. I grew up around a place where my dad fished, and he said, I wasn't even that interested in fishing, but once I kind of got into the routine of doing fishing, or whatever it might be, those of us that have hobbies, you know, I like to shoot a bow and arrow, or whatever, you know, or people that like to work on trains, or their jog, or whatever the issue might be, to just change you from thinking about and being drawn to that addiction. And so it's interesting because I think those of us that are Christians, we have a very significant advantage because we have the Holy Spirit in our lives and we have God directing us with his word. But I've seen other individuals dealing with things like sexual addiction and been able to break it as well. But your story is just a great one, but also just a terrible reminder, I would have to say, Keith, that at the age of 7, you became addicted. Imagine the dangers now when before you had to go to somebody's house and get one of those magazines or see one of those videos. Now, much of that is just a mouse click away on your computer or just a scroll away on your phones. And so if you have this kind of problem that developed more than 40 years ago, imagine the kind of problem we're dealing with now with young people that have access to pornography that never really even was available for the vast majority of individuals in our population.
Yes, it's getting way out of control. And the part of the thing for myself is because I had the access to the computer later in life. You know, granted, it was the magazines and whatnot, but as time went on into the 1990s, in the year 2000 or so, is that it was readily available on the internet. And that there really dug its claws right into my soul.
Yes.
And just kept me there.
Wow.
So, I really understand that.
I do too. Well, I'm coming to a break, and Keith, I appreciate, first of all, you taking the time to stay over. Second of all, your vulnerability of being willing to share that. And third, the victory that we share with you. And encourage all of our listeners to be praying for you, Keith. And thank you for calling today at Point of View.
It's all by the grace of God. Thank you very much.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into some other issues. If you'd like to join us on that topic or many of the others we're going to get into, we certainly do welcome your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. One of the articles, though, I did post was how, if nothing else, this horrific crisis in Houston and the hurricanes and the downpour have really shown some very positive things to talk about, and I want to do that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if the younger generation wants to know the keys to success, they need to follow the success sequence published by Bradford Wilcox and Wendy Wang. They say that the millennial generation is more likely to flourish financially if they follow the success sequence. They say you need to get at least a high school degree, work full-time, and marry before having any children, in that order. Their recent study at the American Enterprise Institute has the title, The Millennial Success Sequence, Marriage, Kids, and the Success Sequence Among Young Adults. They persuasively argue that if millennials follow this success sequence, they will have a 97% chance of not being poor by the time they reach their young adult years. In fact, 86% of those studied had family incomes in the middle class or above. Their study reminded me of another study posted by William Galston. Many years ago, he found that in order to avoid being poor, you must do three things. First, graduate from high school. Second, wait until age 20 to have children. And 3, wait until getting married to have children. He has found that young people who follow these rules have a 92% chance of staying above the poverty line. By contrast, a young person who breaks just one of these rules has a 79% chance of being below the poverty line. In a more recent op-ed, William Galston, who served in the Clinton administration, made it even simpler. Want to know the best poverty cure? Get married. Single parenthood hurts all children, and black children bear the greatest brunt of the harm. All of these different studies come to the same conclusion. Marriage is important, and the keys to success are to follow what is now being called the success sequence. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett, now playing rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For the last couple of days, of course, we talked about Hurricane Harvey, and we recognize what a tragedy it is. The waters are starting to subside, but this is going to be a long-term process. And as we've mentioned before, if you would like to help those victims indirectly through Samaritan's Purse, we still have, of course, a link for that on the website. But I wanted to spend just a few minutes, if I could, reading from 2 articles to help us understand that sometimes when there's a crisis, it brings us back to first things. It brings us back, as I read from Ben Shapiro's, to some of the criticisms of gender stereotypes kind of fade away. And then as I read this piece from Jonah Goldberg, some of the racial divisions actually fade away as well. Ben Shapiro's piece we've posted, I think it is the second article on the website there. Hurricane Harvey's men, women, and children. In a crisis, strong men are no longer toxic. Women protect children, and children are innocent. And he says on Sunday, as images from Hurricane Harvey stunned the nation, one particular image stuck out for many individuals as indicative of the heroism of Texans in the face of disaster. It was a picture of a man in a ball cap carrying a woman through the water. The woman, in turn, holds a baby close to her, curled up on her chest. The picture struck a chord with many people because it seems so instinctively right. The woman protecting her child, the man protecting the woman, and carrying them all through danger. This is a vision of humanity that carries through some of the darkest trials, Ben Shapiro says. Men as protectors, women as guardians, children as innocents. And yet our society has devoted itself wholesale to the destruction of this image. First, he says men. The men we look at and we look up to are protectors. As Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman writes, and by the way, Colonel Grossman's been on this program many times over the decades, in On Combat, in a paragraph later paraphrased in American Sniper, he says, "You have no capacity for violence, then you are a healthy, productive citizen, a sheep. If you have a capacity for violence and no empathy for your fellow citizens, then you have defined and are defined as an aggressive sociopath, a wolf. But what if you have the capacity for violence and a deep love for your fellow citizens? Then you're a sheepdog, a warrior, someone who is walking the hero's path." Now, you know, we've talked about this idea of sheepdog before, and here Ben Shapiro picks up on it. He says, "But all men must strive to be sheepdogs, and that doesn't always require violence. The sheepdog must be willing to do violence, but must also ensure protection of the flock against all manner of horror. That's the role of men in the social fabric. That doesn't mean that women can't participate in that task, but a society of men who refuse to protect will be a society that collapses in short order." He goes on and talks about some of the aspects of this as well. He says this vision of what it means to be a man has been shattered over the course of the last several decades. Now we're told that manhood no longer has a meaning, or that it has so many different meanings that it's indistinguishable from other more malleable concepts. We've been informed by the feminist movement that the vision of man as protector is degrading to women, that women don't need protection, that women can be protectors just as men can. And we've been informed by the transgender movement that women can be men and that men can be women, that gender is entirely malleable. We've been told by the social left that men's protective nature is inextricably intertwined with toxic masculinity, that the aggressive instincts that undergirds man's defense of his family also undergirds his violence against others. The result has been manhood in retreat. Men feel unmanned. They feel that their innate nature has been tossed aside. Too many men revert to the posturing of wolves, refusing the responsibility of protecting the herd. Some men cower in the face of protection, feeling that to overstep their boundaries would be to bolster the patriarchy. But when danger strikes, men are there. You know, you start thinking about this. How many men out there rescuing? How many women? But then he says the second part. Then there's the woman in the picture holding a child. The traditional role of women has been guarding the children. That doesn't mean that women shouldn't work. Far from it. Doesn't mean that the female value lies only in guarding kids. Of course not. But the vision of societal femininity that doesn't include guarding the innocence of children isn't a vision of femininity at all. All of the humanity relies on motherhood, and the mother's role doesn't end at birth. Yet, he says, the social left has targeted even this innocuous standard, too. Women have been told that abortion is the mark of virtue. They've been told that a career is inherently more important than childbearing. They've been informed that children can take care of themselves, that self-fulfillment should take priority over care for children. Stay-at-home moms have been scoffed at. Women who believe in the sanctity of the unborn have been castigated as sellouts. But when disaster strikes, women are there. Finally, the sleeping child. The role of children in society isn't that of decision maker, as one senator seems to suggest this week. Children should be able to sleep through crises. The adults are in charge. Yet even this simple notion has been tossed aside by the social left, which insists that children are sophisticated enough to decide their own sex, their own standards of education, their own standards of morality. But when disaster strikes, men and women will protect children. He concludes by saying, many Americans have spent decades at war with manhood, womanhood, and childhood. We've tried to demean the glorious diversity of sex and age into the box of perfect sameness, and we failed. When horror strikes, however, these differences rise to the surface once again, and if we're lucky, we're reminded why a society that cherishes those differences survives. If nothing else, Hurricane Harvey and other crises like this remind us that men really do need to be men and need to be protectors. Women need to be nurturing and protecting their children, and children should be allowed to be innocent. The other one I want to read real quickly before we take our next break is the issue of race. And Jonah Goldberg puts it this way: Harvey reveals the best side of a divided America. He says even hurricanes have a silver lining. The downpour washes away a lot of bull. He said, don't get me wrong, this is a tragedy for untold thousands of people, and no upside could possibly balance the scales against the downside. The full human toll of Harvey, and now a tropical storm, remains to be determined, but it's already steep. As of this writing, the official count of fatalities was up to 14. Of course, it's twice that now, more than twice that now. And he goes through a number of other issues. But he said, I couldn't help but notice that there is a feel-good aspect to the whole catastrophe. He said the best example of this hyper-viral story of two men loading up their boat and driving into the storm. CNN's reporter found them under a highway overpass readying the vehicle. So the CNN reporter asked, you guys jumping in to help out? Yes, sir, said one of the men. What are you going to do? The CNN reporter asked. I'm going to go try to save some lives. The man, he says, was African-American. His partner appeared to be Caucasian or maybe Latino, but it doesn't matter at all. You don't know if they're Republican or Democrat, pro-Trump or anti-Trump, NRA members or fans of gun control. Though he said, let's be honest, this is Texas, so we can kind of guess on that one, can't we? All they wanted to do was help. Well, it was a journalist's faux pas not to get the men's names. It almost made the story more endearing that we didn't get them because it reinforced the idea that they were what? Just normal Americans. Jonah Goldberg says, all weekend TV and social media highlighted stories like this. Granted, there were plenty of attempts to politicize the storm. There was the superficial legitimacy. Did Texas officials, particularly the Democratic mayor of Houston and the Republican governor of Texas, drop the ball in not ordering a mandatory evacuation? But even these debates lacked the bitter vitriol that marked the coverage of Hurricane Katrina or even Hurricane Sandy. Other attempts to bend an apolitical event to a preferred political narrative were more desperate and despicable. A Twitter account for one individual unleashed a gale of comments saying that Texas was bitten by karma, but they still have a huge debt to the bank of karma. And, of course, we've seen some of those as well. But the point he's making is that politics and ideology aside, we can begin to recognize that all of that is downstream from what's really important in life, at least in America. And most of us can see this within our own networks of friends and family, where political differences rarely trump more meaningful bonds. But on a mass scale, it becomes apparent only in dire circumstances, like when floodwaters wash away the nonsense and reveal the decency of the American people. I've said before that if you want to understand America, don't look at Charlottesville, look at Houston, and look at all that has happened that is good, even in the midst of an unspeakable tragedy that is going to affect us for many years. If you'd like to join our conversations, 1-800-351-1212. We come back, I want to get back into some of the political news. We are going to have a debate on tax reform and also on tax cuts. So we're going to get into those issues right after these important messages.
Would you like to be above average or exceptional? I'll explain how you can be in a moment. What do you think about change? Some people love it, others not so much. I'm guessing you agree our culture needs change. But how will that happen? Change happens with you and your influence. If each of us does our part, God can change the culture through us. That's a goal at Point of View, to help you change things around you. We never charge for the information we deliver each day, but that information is not free. There is a significant cost in getting it to you. You know who helps us do that? About 1 out of every 800 listeners to Point of View. So you can be above average. You can be exceptional by visiting pointofview.net and clicking the banner Change Happens with You, or by calling 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for being exceptional by supporting Point of View. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talked a little bit about some of the lessons from Hurricane Harvey. We'll get into perhaps more of that tomorrow, but we'll see how that plays out. Also have some very important conversations we want to have with our roundtable guest. We'll have Kelly Shackelford back with us and also Debbie Georgiades. So 2 lawyers in town and in studio. Should be very interesting. So I look forward to the conversation with them and with you. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Well, President Trump has made it very clear that if there's anything he wants the returning members of Congress to do, it's to at least pass a tax cut, preferably pass not only a tax cut but tax reform. And then, of course, we still have a piece of legislation that passed the House of Representatives, which would do something to the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, that is still waiting for some kind of Senate action. So those are the issues there. But let's talk about the issue of a tax cut. Then we'll get into tax reform. Love to get your comments. Do you feel like you are overtaxed or undertaxed? Some people have said, I feel like I'm overtaxed, and as a result, Congress has put us in a situation where the government, especially the federal government, overspends. But if you don't think that is the case, here are some numbers that just came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They're not new, by the way, interestingly enough. They found that Americans, on average, spend more on taxes and did last year in 2016. Americans spent more on taxes in 2016 than they did on food and clothing combined. That comes from research done by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And according to the way in which they calculate that, they look at what are called consumer units. Leave it to the federal government to call families consumer units. Well, I know why they do this, because what they do is they try to put everybody together, because an intact family is one unit, but then you also have financially independent individuals as another unit, and then even people living in a single household who share expenses as a third unit. So that's why they've gone from talking about families to consumer units. It still kind of bothers me, because after all, did God create consumer units? I think God created families, but we'll leave that alone. But if you use the Bureau of Labor Statistics for last year and you look at consumer units, you find that they spend on average for federal, state, and local taxes. You might get something to write with, because this would be a great letter to the editor or email to some of your members of Congress. Again, when you look at federal, state, and local taxes, $10,489, the average. So $10,000 in round numbers. What did they spend on food? Well, these consumer units, that would be families or financially independent individuals or people living in the same household, spent $7,203. And then clothing for basically $1,803. I know that's probably pretty low for some of you, especially for your spouses. But nevertheless, if you look at this and you add those two numbers together, 7,203, clothing, 1,803, you come up with $9,006. So again, we spend more on average as Americans on taxes than we do on food and clothing combined. Isn't that incredible? And so that just is one very important way to look at this. And again, these consumer units are all members of a particular household who are related by blood, marriage, adoption, or other legal arrangements, or it could be a person living alone or sharing a household with other individuals. And this is just one way to look at the amount that we spend in taxes. Now, if you receive my daily commentary, my Viewpoints commentary, back in May, I gave you a different way to look at this. And that is to recognize that even though tax day this year landed on April 18th rather than April 15th, it still is kind of interesting because Tax Freedom Day happened later. And so that was April 23rd. And so, of course, that varies a little bit. Tax Freedom Day for people in Mississippi landed on April 5th. Tax Freedom Day for people in Connecticut landed on May 21st. Now, what is Tax Freedom Day? Well, that's where basically the Tax Foundation takes all the taxes that you and I pay, federal, state, and local, and they then average it out by state, also nationally. And essentially what it says is if you take the average from January 1st to April 23rd, you were essentially working for the government, federal, state, and local, because it took you from January 1st to April 23rd to earn enough income to pay all of your taxes. And then after April 23rd, then you actually have what we call Tax Freedom Day. But before you get really excited about the fact, well, I only had to work 4 of the months of the year to pay my taxes, here's the other part of it. Some have also calculated what is known as the Cost of Government Day. Now, Cost of Government Day did not arrive last year until July 6th. I never did figure out where it was this year. And that is where then you add up not only the taxes, federal, state, and local regulations, but also and taxes, but also federal, state, and local regulations. So if you add up all the taxes, federal, state, and local, all the regulations, federal, state, and local, then it happens after July. And so it illustrates even more so that you are working most of the year, 186 days, to pay what the government demands either in taxes or regulations. So that's why some people have said, maybe it is time for some kind of tax reform. And so a while back, I posted some principles that the Wall Street Journal came out with in terms of the principles. And the first of those would be to make a priority on growth. I'm going to come back to that in just a minute and talk about how I think we can encourage some kind of growth, because the goal was to actually lift the GDP to 3%. Guess what? We just did. Interestingly enough, this was buried, and somebody pointed out it was buried on page 16 today of the Washington Post. We've been told for years that we may never see another time where we have 3% growth. We did not have 3% growth during the entire 8 years of President Barack Obama. We just achieved 3% growth, and it got buried in part because it would look too positive, I suspect, to President Trump, although you'd have to give some credit to President Obama or the Congress or something, because after all, some of the growth that takes place in May and June, even in January, are related to some of the things that happened before, but nevertheless, it was buried. But the goal to get at least 3% growth is one very important reason to do tax reform. The second is if we're going to do these tax cuts, and I hope now I've given you enough justification for why maybe we do need to cut some taxes, that the suggestion has been to make them immediate. This was the painful lesson that President George W. Bush learned in the 2001 tax cut. Because he could not get them immediate, he was willing to allow them to be phased in. He corrected that in 2003, and there's a very good reason for that. If you know that tax cuts are coming later on, you're probably going to wait. If you think that some of these various tax cuts or subsidies are going to be implemented next year, you're going to do what you can to postpone till next year when they actually take place. Then the third argument, and before we take a break, let me get that one out on the table as well. Tax reform needs to be permanent. The businesses invest with what is called a long tail. The typical business, especially huge businesses and multinational corporations, they're not thinking about what they're going to do this year alone, or even what they're going to do this year and next year. They many times have a 5-year plan. They have a 10-year plan. They're going to figure out how they're going to expense some of these various issues. And this is, I think, really important. And they're not going to do too much if indeed they implement a project and then these lower rates or these different regulations or these different subsidies or whatever just begin to evaporate. It makes sense. And again, that was a mistake that George W. Bush made. So again, these are going to be contentious issues. But if nothing else, this is going to be the ongoing debate. I hope, if nothing else, I've given you at least a little bit of justification for why maybe a tax cut is necessary, if for no other reason than you spend 1/4 of your time simply trying to work enough to pay the taxes, and you work essentially half the year to pay either for the taxes or the regulations that affect you either directly or indirectly with the various products that you purchase. So let's take a break. When we come back, I'd love to get your comments about tax cuts, tax reform, and our friends at the Heritage Foundation have 4 ways to change our tax code to boost economic growth. We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It all started with a postal worker, a bunch of pigs, and an old-time radio show. But it ended in court. Back in 1937, Wayman Presley, an Illinois postal worker, decided that it would be a good idea to erect a cross on Bald Knob. The fundraising was slow until Ralph Edwards interviewed Presley on the wildly popular radio show This Is Your Life. Myrta Klutz must have heard the show because she soon conceived the idea to raise and sell pigs to finish the construction. Klutz, with the help of Presley, raised $30,000 worth of pork. So there it stood, 111 feet of gleaming white concrete, 1,034 feet above sea level, near the Bald Knob Wilderness. But it turns out not everyone liked it. Robert Sherman didn't, so Sherman did what most don't think to do when they disagree with an inanimate object. He sued the state of Illinois for giving out a grant to help restore the aging monument. But his lawsuit was dismissed. Turns out Sherman didn't have a dog or pig in the fight. Just because someone is a taxpayer is not enough connection to a case to challenge an action by the state. Sherman versus Illinois raises an important point. Just because someone is offended by something religious does not mean a lawsuit will be successful. State officials should remember that next time someone demands they purge religion from public view. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If not, we'll get to some of those tomorrow. We're going to have our weekend edition. Kelly Shackelford and Debbie Georgiadis will be with us around the round table, and we'll get to some calls in just a minute. But the Heritage Foundation also talked about 4 ways to change our tax code to boost economic growth. And you might say, well, why do I care about economic growth? Well, when we have growing economies, you also have an increase in wages and an economic dynamism that I think we're going to start enjoying, because all of a sudden now we have 3% growth of GDP. A couple points real quickly. First of all, allow full expensing. This is something that we need to change because we have an archaic, outdated, overly complex system which says, well, you only get to deduct part of your expense. And the idea is most businesses would just like to be able to deal with these expenses, whatever it might be. You get new office space, needed to hire additional workers. You should be able to expense it right away, not extend it over a period of time. Of course, that would actually simplify tax paying, and I'm all about that because the tax code is so complex. It is really time for us to seriously consider whether or not we want to bring about some of those changes. You know, people have been trying to figure out how many pages are actually part of the tax register, and you've heard the number that there are 70,000 pages. Actually, that's the length of the standard federal tax reporter, but nevertheless, even if you just look at the tax code itself, it is 2,600 pages. And so whether you want to use the number of 2,600 pages or use the number of 7,000 pages, both of those are huge pages of tax codes, and we just need to simplify that. Number two, lower the corporate tax income. Right now, we have the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world. When you add up the federal taxes along with the state taxes, it's almost 40%. Compare that to China, 25%. Compare that to Ireland, 12.5%. You know, one of the reasons the Irish economy took off was not the luck of the Irish. The Irish miracle was due in large part to lowering the corporate tax rate. So that's another thing we need to do. Number three, lower tax rates for individuals. Now, that's back to where you are as well. They make the argument to allow Americans to keep more of their own money, tax reform must lower the tax rates for individuals. In addition to sending less money to Washington, lower rates strengthen the economy by improving the incentives to work, to save, and to invest. And when you start hearing all the rhetoric about we don't want to give a tax cut to the rich, the reality is that the rich already pay a disproportionate number of taxes. The real tax cut that's going to have an impact is the tax cut that's going to come to you and me, because most of us in the listening audience fit into the category of the middle class. And then finally, they say eliminate the tax subsidies. They say the tax code should not be used to pick winners and losers. That means that tax reform should eliminate as many individual and corporate deductions, credits, exclusions, exemptions as possible. What you right now have in the tax code is corporate cronyism. And it makes it more difficult, first of all, to calculate those taxes. But second of all, it, in a sense, allows the government to play winners and losers. And that doesn't make any sense if for no other reason than the fact that the government is probably the worst. Bureaucrats may be some of the worst people to try to figure out which particular companies and businesses should succeed and which of them should fail. And of course, it completely skews the free market system. So these are just a couple of ways to boost economic growth and to simplify the tax code. But just as we come to the end of the program today, I wanted to leave you with one other comment. And we're going to have really two very important debates coming up right about now. The first is going to be on the debt limit. We've talked about this before here on Point of View. The debt limit is going to be one debate. And, of course, the tax reform debate is going to be the other. The debate that needs to take place is the one that gets ignored all the time. And Justin Bogey and Chase Flowers the other day in a piece wrote, America is heading straight into its most avoidable crisis ever. And they actually use a comparison that say that what we're heading towards in terms of this disaster is something akin to the sinking of the Titanic. The crew of the Titanic chose to ignore warnings about icebergs. And in a sense, if you want to keep the metaphor going, we've got this huge iceberg called the national debt, and the crew on the USS Congress are really choosing to ignore it. We have a federal debt right now, which is what? I think most of you probably know what it is, $20 trillion. It's growing at an unsustainable rate. According to some of the long-term projections that came down this March from the Congressional Budget Office, they said, quote, the federal debt is projected to increase from $20 trillion to $92 trillion in the next 30 years, unquote. Now, the areas where that growth is going to take place are in three categories: Social Security, then major health care programs. We're talking about Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, things like that. And the number three, interest on the debt. These are really the three areas that are going to be driving the national debt. So what's the impact? You know, yesterday we had our millennial roundtable. I'd like to get back to this with our millennials sometime because, first of all, we recognize that they are going to deal with this in ways that the rest of us, perhaps that are older, have not had to deal with it. Because first, interest rates could rise sharply. Why? Well, because creditors want more protection if they're going to make that investment, or because the government, in trying to sell government bonds, finds that people aren't willing to buy those bonds at the current rates, and so they have to increase the interest rates. Second, the higher interest rates are going to mean the cost of the federal deficit is greater because we have to pay more interest on the debt because the interest rates are not low, they're high. And this, of course, would force the government either to tax more or borrow more. And third, this increased federal debt would restrict the government's ability to use tax and spend policies to respond to a financial crisis or an economic downturn, or even what just happened with Hurricane Harvey. And, of course, as we pointed out, the younger generations of America are the ones that are going to have to bear the brunt of these dire economic trends. So unless Congress is willing to reduce spending, willing to rein in these entitlements, then higher taxes and lower wages are what await many of these younger members of the society in the future. So again, those are just a few things to be thinking about as you start hearing this debate taking place on tax reform and tax cuts. Those are very important debates. Of course, the debate about the debt ceiling is going to be another. I saw the other day that one individual said we shouldn't tie providing relief for the victims of Hurricane Harvey to the debt limit, although I think that would be a good idea because then at least Congress might start paying attention to how we increase the national debt every single year, and all we simply continue to do is raise the debt limit without trying to do anything to reduce it significantly. But again, the other debate that needs to take place is what are we going to do to prevent a complete destruction of the economy sometime in the distant future, but also placing so much of an economic burden on our children and our grandchildren. Well, that's all we have for today. We've posted a couple of very important articles for you on the website. Don't forget, again, the desire for us to encourage you to be a part of that September 14th event, The Heart of Man. And so, again, we encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net, find out a little bit more. If you'd still like to make a donation to help the victims of Hurricane Harvey, we have that on the website as well. I want to thank Andrew, Elisa, and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Look forward to our program tomorrow on our weekend edition. We'll see you then.
There are those who listen to Point of View while they're driving, and some can listen at home or at work. But here's the question. Where do you go where you cannot listen to Point of View? Well, if you have the app, the free Point of View radio app, the answer is just about nowhere. This is an on-the-go world, and now wherever you go, Point of View goes with you. Visit the Apple or Google Play Store and download the free Point of View app. You can listen and watch the program live or play it again later. Get Kerby's Viewpoints commentary. Click the Take Action link. Learn about important issues and make a difference in this world. You can also read articles, find a local radio station, easily contact us with your comments or questions. Don't leave home or the office or anywhere else without Point of View. Again, visit the Apple or Google Play Store today and get the app, the free Point of View radio app. Oh, and one more thing, if you like it, click that little button that says Donate Now and join the team. Point of View and the Point of View app with you on the go. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.